Well, welcome back for part 2. Is there anything better than laying in bed with a good book? So here is our next part of the book as Mrs. Millet is cozy in her bed, in her pajamas, and ready to read a great book before she goes to bed. I hope you have enjoyed the book so far. What have you thought about the first part of the book? So here is part 2, 1.2. So here we go. One thing trees and crows have in common, in fact, one thing that all the natural world has in common, is the rule that we're not supposed to talk to people. It's for our own protection, at least that's the theory. I've often wondered if the endless silence is a good idea. There have been so many times I've wanted to speak up, to intervene, to help people. I've never said a word, though. That's just the way the world has always worked. Have there been some slip-ups? Sure, mistakes have been made. Last year I heard a frog named Fly who'd been napping in a mailbox. All frogs are named after bugs that they enjoy eating. When the mailman opened the box, Fly leapt out with a frantic croak. The mailman fainted. He woke up to Fly, who was apologizing profusely, squatting on his forehead. Clearly a breach of the don't talk to people rule. But as always seems to happen, the incident was soon forgotten. After all, the mailman was absolutely certain that frogs can't talk. Just hearing things, he no doubt told himself. Interestingly enough, he retired not long after the frog incident. In any case, when you consider the number of trees and frogs and otters and wrens and dragonflies and armadillos and everybody else in the natural world, you'd think people would have caught on to our little secret by now. Well, what can I say? Nature is tricky and people are, well, sorry, but most of you aren't very observant. Perhaps you're wondering, if you're a curious or doubting sort, just exactly how trees communicate. You may find yourself inspecting a nearby ponderosa pine, perhaps, or an aspen or a sweet gum, puzzling out the magic. People speak with the help of lungs, throats, voice boxes, tongues, and lips, thanks to an intricate symphony of sound and breath and movement. But there are plenty of other ways to convey information. An eyebrow cocked, a giggle stifled, a tear brushed aside. These too are ways you express yourself. For a tree, communication is just as complicated and miraculous as it is for humans. In a mysterious dance of sunlight and sugar, water and wind and soil, we build invisible bridges to connect with the world. Frogs have their own way of connecting, same for dogs, same for newts and spiders and elephants and eagles. How exactly do we do it? That's for us to know and you to figure out. Nature also adores a good secret. I'm not just a tree, by the way. I'm a home, a community. Folks nest on my branches, burrow between my roots, and lay eggs on my leaves. And then there are my hollows, tree hollows. Holes in a trunk or a branch are not uncommon, especially in trees like me who've been around for a while. Hollows can be small enough for tiny salt and pepper chickadees or a family of deer mice, or they can be quite large, big enough for an open-minded bear. Of course, I'm a city tree. We don't get a lot of bears around here, unless they're of the teddy bear variety, but I've hosted more than my share of raccoons, foxes, skunks, opossums, and mice. One year, I was home to a lovely and exceedingly polite porcupine family. I've even sheltered a person. Long story. I have lots of those stored up way away. I have lots of those stored up the way a squirrel hoards acorns. Hollows happen for many reasons. Woodpeckers, fallen branches, lightning, disease, and burrowing insects. In my case, I have 3 hollows. 2 medium-sized ones were made by woodpeckers. The largest one happened when I was quite young. I lost a large branch that was weakened by wet snow during a nor'easter. It was a big wound, slow to heal, and my spring leafing that year was paltry, my fall color pale and frankly embarrassing. But eventually the hole healed, widened with the help of insects, and now, about 4 feet off the ground, I have a deep hollow. Hollows offer protection from the elements, a secure spot to sleep and to stash your belongings. They're a safe place. Hollows are proof that something bad can become something good with enough time and care and hope. Being a home to others isn't always easy. Sometimes I feel like an apartment complex with too many residents who don't always get along. Still, we make it work. There's a lot of give and take in nature. Woodpeckers hammer at my trunk, but they also eat annoying pests. Grass cools the earth, but it also bickers with me over water. Every spring brings new residents, old friends, and more chances for compromise. This spring in particular has been quite the baby boom. Currently, I am home to owl nestlings, baby opossums, and tiny raccoons. I am also visited regularly by the skunk kits who live underneath the front porch of a nearby house. This is unprecedented. Never have I sheltered so many babies. It just doesn't happen. Animals like space. They like their own territory. Normally, there would be arguing, perhaps even a stolen nest or a midnight battle. And certainly, there have been some disagreements. But I have made it clear that eating your neighbors will not be allowed while I am in charge. Me, I don't feel crowded at all having so much company. Making others feel safe is a fine way to spend your days. I have one more community member, although visitor is probably a better way to describe Samar. In January, she moved with her parents into one of the houses I shade, a tiny blue house with a sagging porch and a tiny garden. She is perhaps 10 years old or so, with wary eyes and a shy smile. Samar has a look of someone who has seen too much, someone who wants the world to quiet itself. Soon after moving in, Samar began sneaking into the yard once her parents had fallen asleep. Even on the coldest nights, she trudged outside in her red boots and her green jacket. Her breath was a frosty veil. She would stare at the moon and at me, and sometimes at the little greenhouse next door, where a boy, who looks to be about her age, lives. As it grew warmer, Samar would venture out in her pajamas and robe and sit beneath me on an old blanket spattered with moonlight. Her silence was so complete, her gentleness so apparent, that the residents would crawl from their nests of thistledown and dandelion fluff to join her. They seemed to accept her as one of their own. Bongo especially loved Samar. She would flit to her shoulder and settle there. Sometimes she would say hello in a fine imitation of Samar's voice. Often Bongo gave Samar little gifts she'd found during her daily flights. A Monopoly token, the car, a gold hair ribbon, a cap from a root beer bottle. Bongo keeps a stash of odds and ends in one of my smaller hollows, which the opossums kindly tolerate. "You'll never know who I might need to bribe," she likes to say. But her gifts to Samar weren't bribes. They were just Bongo's way of saying, "I'm glad we're friends." If this were a fairy tale, I would tell you something magical about Samar. That she cast a spell on the animals, perhaps? Animals don't just leave their nests and burrows willingly. They are afraid of people, with good reason. But this isn't a fairy tale, and there was no spell. Animals compete for resources just like humans. They eat one another. They fight for dominance. Nature is not always pretty or fair or kind. But sometimes surprises happen, and Samar, every spring night, reminded me that there is beauty in stillness and grace in acceptance, and that you're never too old to be surprised. I was pleased to see Samar's family join the neighborhood. It had been a long while since we'd had any newcomers, but I knew that with time they would put down roots just like so many other families from so many other places. I know a thing or two about roots. One night, not long ago, Samar came out to visit. It was 2 a.m, late even for her. She had been crying. Her cheeks were damp. She leaned against me, and her tears were like hot rain. In her hand was a small piece of cloth, pink with little dots, and something was written on it. A wish. The first wish I'd seen in months. I wasn't surprised she knew about the Wishtree tradition, kind of a local celebrity. Samar reached up, gently pulling down my lowest branch, and tied the fabric in a loose knot. I wish, she whispered, for a friend. She glanced over at the greenhouse. Behind an upstairs curtain, a shadow moved. And with that, Samar vanished back into the little blue house. When you stand still for 2 centuries while the world whirls past, things happen. Mostly by far and away good things have been my lot in life. My leaves have cooled picnickers and proposers. Beneath my boughs, vows have been made, hearts mended. Nappers have napped, dreamers have dreamed. I've watched ascents attempted, listened to stories spun. And the laughter, always and forever laughter. But sometimes things happen that aren't good. When they occur, I've learned that there's not much you can do except stand tall and reach deep. I have, for example, been hacked at, carved into, used for target practice. I have been underwatered, overpruned, fertilized and fussed over, ignored and neglected. I have been struck by lightning, battered by sleet. I have been threatened with axes, chainsaws, diseases, and insects. I have tolerated the sharp claws of squirrels and the nagging pokes of woodpeckers. I have been climbed by cats and marked by dogs. I have my aches and pains like everyone. Last year I had a mite infestation that drove me nuts. Leaf blisters, sooty mold, oak wilt, leaf scorch. Been there, done that. Still, trees are luckier than people in one way. Only 1% of a fully grown tree is actually alive at any one time. Most of me is made of wood cells that are no longer living. In many ways, that makes me tougher than you. So yes, I've seen a lot. And who knows, I may see much more. I could live to be 300, 500 even. It happens. Red oaks lead long lives, longer than our daintier friends black willows, persimmons, apples, and red buds. And yet, a few days after Samar's tearful wish, something happened that made me wonder if I'd finally witnessed too much. And we'll stop there. Good night.